All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I was waiting for that delightful music to fade away. Thank you so much again for coming out to SpringOne tour. We're here on a retro of the SpringOne show that we had a few weeks ago. Is incredible. We have with us the different hosts of the tracks that we're running. There are 5 tracks with content and then a social track. So there's no MC for that, but we might even chime in on those fun things. You are all welcome to chime in on the Q&A with either questions that you might have or just comments about the show itself. We were so excited to put it on. It was, of course, a new challenge. It was all virtual. This was not how we normally do things. This is a hoodie that I got from one that we had 2 years ago. And so we're normally all together and hanging out and going and watching tracks and going out to eat afterwards and talking business and having fun and connecting. And so this was this new bold frontier for us as a company and as a spring event. And I've got a coworker coming in here. Hold on a second, buddy. Daddy's got a show right now. Can you give me a few minutes? I'll help you with that in a minute. Yeah, he's having a battery problem. I mean, batteries, right? Okay, I'll help you in a second, buddy, I promise. Okay, here we go. This is what happens when you got a 3-year-old boss. You gotta just take care of it right here and now, because otherwise batteries aren't going to fix themselves. Am I right? Okay, buddy, here you go. Okay, that's a sock. That's mommy's sock. Okay, thank you so much. Right, working from home. That's the way it is. Anyway, where was I? This event was incredible. It was this new fun thing that we all did, and I want to thank the team that put it all together. It was incredible, and we're gonna talk about it. So I think I have a few things I need to go over real quick. Oh yeah, let's introduce who's coming, who's here, who's on the panel. So we have with us, the illustrious Cote. His full name is Michael Cote, but we call him Cote. And he's in technical marketing. We got Brian Closell, who's a Spring team member, Glenn Renfro, a VMware engineer, also part of the core committing team for Spring Cloud Tasks, Spring Batch, Spring Cloud Data Flow. Tiffany Jernigan, she's the newest member on our advocacy team. She's bringing the Kubernetes love, and she's doing a great job. She's also co-host with Paul Charkowski and myself on Tanzu Tuesday show. And then, of course, our fabulous Cora Iberclyde. She's been a platform architect with Pivotal and then VMware, and now she's on the advocacy team, and she's amazing. And so all these people helped to MC 2 days of wonderful tracks for all of us to view. And if you haven't gone, for whatever reason, you're on this and you haven't gone, you can go to springone.io right now, and you can, well, not right now, wait till after this show, but you can check out all the content that we're going to talk about. So all the content from the 2 days is up, and you can go check it out at springone.io. Okay, let's bring everybody on. Welcome to the show, everybody. We're truly global because we've got Glenn all the way out in Georgia. We've got Cote all the way in the Netherlands. Tiffany's up in Ski Seattle. I think I can call it that. I got to switch my view to, there we go. Where's everybody? Brian, where are you located?
France.
Where was that?
France, in the EU.
France. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
so yeah, definitely. And then Cora, you're in New York area?
Normally I am. I happen to be in Ohio at the moment, but I do.
The OHIO.
Usually, yes, the OH.
Well, awesome. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We are, again, we're going to have about an hour and a half of just a conversation about the greatness and fun times that we had at Spring IO, the different tracks that we want to highlight. So who's my first up out of the box? I think it's Glenn, right? Because we're talking beginner Spring.
Hello, and I'm the perfect example of a beginner at Spring, right?
Well, what I thought was, so I was the MC and Cora also was the MC for Beginner Spring. And you were our first out of the box Beginner Spring presenter, 9 a.m., bright and early, 6 for me. And you were
and I couldn't tell, man. You were more awake than I was at that time.
Well, you got to put the face on. You got to put the face on.
Oh, that's true. That is so
and
true.
So what was so great about just looking at that track and looking back at all the talks is that we had so many people just wanting to know more about Spring. You know, like we all can get caught in the weeds of what's happening, you know, with microservices and reactive and all that kind of, you know, down the road stuff. But what is Spring? What are some of the basics that we need to know about? And there was so much attention drawn towards those talks, and it was great. So please, I cede the floor to you, and let's start the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. I do appreciate it. And the best part about the beginner-friendly track is it handled it at so many levels. I mean, everything from, I heard of Spring before, but I don't know what it is. And we had to talk about that and how to introduce you into how Spring makes life easier for the developer, what tools are available out there, the history, and it even kind of gave a primer to it as well. The other thing is that just because it was a beginner track didn't mean it wasn't for like those advanced Spring folks out there who'd been in Spring for years. Spring is a wonderful way of just taking and allowing you to pull in several technologies seamlessly together. So while I may be, like we talked about before, I work on Spring Batch, I work on Spring Cloud Data Flow, I don't necessarily always work on maybe the security aspect as much. So there was a talk out there on OAuth and, you know, just to kind of give me that proof of concept of what does it look like? Here's the terminology. How does Spring fit into it? So whether you were an absolute beginner and didn't know anything about it to, I've coded Java before, how do I write a Spring Boot app? To all the way down to, you know, what kind of technologies are out there. This track was for you. So it was for the entire gambit. And I thought that was exciting about that given talk. I think the other thing that was great about it was we covered everything from the some of the technologies that were out there. We even had a section on reactive where we talked about how to, okay, I've been coding some reactive. How do I make an end-to-end stream where I can hook in directly into a SQL database that's reactive, has a reactive driver through R2DBC? How do I communicate between my microservices in a reactive way? There was a talk on how to do that using RSocket, including examples and tips and tricks where Ben even went into saying, well, let me show you all the things I made mistakes on, and gave you demos on that, all the way down to how do you write those tests with Josh Long and Mario getting together and having just a wonderful chat about that and making it a lot of fun. My goodness, I'm going to open it up to some folks. Did y'all see any talks that y'all liked out there?
I just like fully clicked that one of my favorite talks, especially since it helps a lot of people who are like, what is this? Was actually your talk. And I'm like, oh, I've been with the infamous Glenn this entire time.
I think, what was also exciting about it is we actually had a talk on documentation. And I thought that was great that Jay and I think it was Josh put together. And just on like, how do you write docs that people want to read that's valuable, but also something you want to read? And their talk was if Hemingway wrote Java docs. I don't know. I have read Hemingway's books, but I don't ever think I saw a / ever in his books. So I know he created objects out there. I'm still looking for those. I think that one of the other things I thought was exciting about it was that we had a talk about metrics, right? Observability. And that's just a huge topic out there. And so we had Spring Boot Observability, a talk on just, thinking about how do I write a boot app from the beginning, soup to nuts beginning, where I'm just using, the actuator, then building on and adding a micrometer to it, right? And then so that I could create custom metrics. And then how can I use Wavefront to show and set up alerts for this? And then lastly, our apps don't live in a vacuum, right? They live in their microservices. They're communicating with each other. And so how do we do this distributed tracing? And talked about Spring Cloud Sleuth. So that talk was a fantastic one on observability. And I'll keep talking, folks. So if y'all want to chime in and throw something in there, you'll go right ahead. Okay, I'll keep talking.
I really like the intro to WebMVC functional with Arden.
Yes.
because usually it usually sits in the advanced intermediate track, but I think that one really should resonate with people if you ever worked with
reading lessons.
Spark,
Just leave that right there for
Java,
now. I'll
or
fix it later.
web frameworks that are really more functional. You can have that choice right now in Spring Framework. You don't have to go with annotations. And if you ever worked with that kind of framework, you can have that choice now. And I think it's that one is short, and you can definitely check it out and see that you have new choices in framework in the web space. I really liked it.
Actually, that was a good one. That's one of the ones I have not watched yet, but definitely was on there. And it's a 30-minute talk, and I sat there and went, now that is pretty cool. And as I'm starting to write more functions that I think can be reused, I was like, oh, that's attractive. I love writing code, but I don't like to rewrite code. And no, I don't like to copy and paste, even though that does make me feel powerful. So the other talk, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, like one of the ones that I also especially was helpful, since like for me, like as Bob mentioned, I started fairly recently and I hadn't dealt with Spring at all, and it's still pretty new. So also the intro to Spring Cloud by Olga Matuszak Sharma and Spencer Gibb was also especially like enlightening and useful for me to just understand like how, like, what is Spring Cloud, or like yours, what is Spring, just like the little bits and pieces. And then seeing some of the other talks of where they would talk about things that you could be using with them was just really helpful.
I thought that was a valuable talk because Spring Cloud is just this huge suite of projects. And it was a great way to show, here's some of the key projects to keep an eye out for and what problems they solve. That, I agree with you. That was a very valuable talk. I think another one, I'm going to go ahead and say I gave another talk. It was on Spring Cloud Data Flow. And it's also talking about, when we talk about Spring Cloud, we're deploying these apps out into a distributed world, right? And it could be on-prem, a hybrid cloud on-prem, or pure cloud on various providers, whether it's Azure or GCP, whatever along those lines. But with the Spring Cloud Dataflow talk, it's like, how do you orchestrate these? If I've got hundreds of apps in a stream, apps in stream, and I have hundreds of streams out there, how do I orchestrate those? If I'm running ephemeral app applications, or you can think of ephemeral microservices, and you think of those as more like batch apps, and I'm not pushing just 10s or 20 out into my distributed environment. I'm pushing hundreds or thousands. How do I orchestrate those? The Spring Cloud Dataflow shows you how Spring Cloud Dataflow can orchestrate these tasks or batch apps, as well as these streams, and all the ability to be able to monitor them once they're out there. And this talk was like a great primer on just getting started. What does it take to get your streams out there? And shows you how Dataflow simplifies that whole process for you. So I was excited to give that talk. And it also kind of shows you the scale in which Spring Cloud is thinking.
I think that's really interesting, because as I was going through some of these talks and listening to the main stages, there seemed to be some recurring themes, and definitely the event-based architectures, event streaming, kind of that bleeding into functions, definitely came up many, many times, throughout different talks. And so I think that kind of intro for people is really valuable.
Agreed. And I think we also talked about, there was also the Spring security patterns, right? And then also explain it to me like I'm 5, talk about OAuth and OpenID. I was actually, the only thing I was disappointed in that talk is I was hoping they would do it more like explain it to me like I'm 2, because I like bright contrasting colors. But other than that, the content was great, talking about concepts and terminology. As far as, what is it? What is OAuth 2? I know I mentioned this earlier, but how does it integrate with our, how do we write this code? Whether I'm writing just that Spring security application or a Spring Boot application. That was what was also really cool. There's always that first time for writing your Spring Boot app. There was the batching in the, fundamental Spring Boot. Writing your first boot app, what does that look like? And then conversely, I don't know about y'all, but I haven't really written anything other than a batch script in VI in many moons. I did used to write Java in VI. I admit it. I did. I did Emacs. I've done VI, but typically we do it in what IDEs these days, right? And so, but what if we had something that made it, you're writing your Spring apps even better, even easier? And there was a talk on Spring Tools on that, so that you could actually kind of get in there and shows you all the strengths that it gives you to make your life easier when you're developing your Spring applications. Let's see, what was there? Does anybody else want to chime in before I throw in my next 2 cents?
I mean, to me, I think what just stands out to me in general is, like you say, right? You want to hear about OAuth, like your 5 or 3 or 2, and I'm with you on that boat. These things are, they always feel a little bit like they're going over my head, and then I forget the next day. But I feel like even without understanding necessarily everything, it blows me away how easy it is to achieve with Spring. Just the integrations that are there and the simplification of everything. That was another recurring theme, security, that showed up in several talks, and though you can get that background, it's astounding how easy Spring makes things.
I think I'm trying to remember the quote that came from, I'm going to see if I can find it without wasting everybody's time too much here. But I think that Phil Webb a few years ago said it perfectly, and I'm going to just go ahead and quote it. So if you see me looking over here, it's because I'm reading it, because I don't want to misquote it here. It says, Spring is an integration framework designed to take lots of different technologies and allow you to combine them in ways that feel natural. And that's exactly what you said, Cora. I can take and write a Spring cloud application and pull in Spring Security, and I can combine them in a common way that feels natural. And these talks showed how I can blend these in such a way that once I've written one, there's these similar concepts I can pull in from all these other Spring projects. And it's like, oh, I understand how to do that. I can pull these 2 technologies together and know that on the most part, they will just work right out the box, which is awesome about Spring.
That's a great way to end that little segment. You nailed it. You stuck the dismount, ladies and gentlemen. The 10 out of 10 from the judges. And if there was an East German judge, which hasn't happened since 1989, you still would have gotten a 10. So congratulations. All right. So yes, let's transition into our next track, which will be kind of moderated by our friend Brian Closell. Brian was one of the core.
I was part of the content committee.
Yeah, the content. Yeah,
trying to select.
I want to say you were like
cater.
the gatekeeper of who was coming in on that. So yes, we're very happy to have you, because being part of the content committee gives you a different perspective. You get to see all the different talks that are coming in, and helping to shape what the intermediate deep dive Spring track was going to look like. So why don't you start with kind of some of that background in terms of what you were looking for and forming that track, and then we can start talking about the track itself.
Sure. So yeah, when we were looking at all the talk submissions, we wanted to have a different track where we would definitely wanted to have a beginner-friendly track where all people would feel welcome, because that event would be online and free and global. So we also wanted to have that track where we're basically all beginner and advanced, depending on the theme, right? So we wanted to have at least one track where, related to core Spring related subjects, where you could dive in directly and skip the intro. So we just wanted to assume that the attendees would be at least familiar with the subject, and we could dive right in. So that's what we did with that track. But honestly, depending on your choice of subject and your experience, some of them might be super easy and very easy to follow, and some others, it might be like you might need to look at the beginner-friendly track if there's a subject that connects to that one before, and that'll definitely help. As for the subjects, we didn't talk about it yet, but during the main stage and the keynote part of the conference, there were several key subjects, I believe, in that track that were touched during the keynotes. And you can find them basically in that track. So I remember at least 4 of them, key subjects. One was the intro to Spring Framework 5.3 with Jürgen. So it's not really an intro in the sense that Jürgen is really going over all the 5.1, 5.2 generation of the Spring Framework, explaining the different themes, where we're going from and to, and really talking about the upcoming 5.3 version, which is going to be released very soon. He also talks in a broader way about what are the plans for this version, which will be an LTS. So it'll be supported until 2024 or something. And our basic ideas and what we've got in mind for Spring Framework 6, which will be the next one. But basically this talk, it sets the tone for the entire portfolio, for all the versions in all the portfolio projects in Spring Boot and so on. So it gives you a good idea about the general trends in the Spring portfolio. And that's a good one to remind you of all the features and everything that went on into the 5X generation, especially 5.2. After that, during the keynote as well, we talked about the Kubernetes space, how to deploy and run your apps on Kubernetes. So there was a talk with Stefan and I about Spring Boot loves Kubernetes. So with that one, we definitely wanted to showcase all the features that we introduced in Spring Boot 2.3 and upcoming features as well. That would help you to deploy your apps on Kubernetes, but not only Kubernetes, because if you look at that talk, you'll see that it's basically best practices, how to adapt to a distributed system, distributed deployment environment. And so basically those are all good features that you could use even if you're not running in Kubernetes. And you don't need really specific knowledge about Kubernetes, but if you know about it, you'll connect the dots and you'll see how this will make things easier for your apps in production. And then there's that whole trend from like framework to apps being deployed in Kubernetes. And then once you get that app, you can maybe turn it into a container image. So there was already a hint of that in the Spring Boot Loves Kubernetes talk. But really, Ben Hale in the Spring to Image talk, there's way more to that. We barely introduced in Spring Boot Love Kubernetes, we introduced cloud native build packs. But if you've got questions basically about what is really cloud native build packs and how they are, I mean, what's the difference between build packs and maybe Jib or other solutions or raw Docker files, this talk definitely helps. I don't think the Q&A was recorded, but I mean, gives you an incentive to really attend to SpringOne next year, because the Q&A I think this year was really good. A lot of interesting questions and very good interactions, especially in my session in Spring to Image. I saw those ones live and they were, I think, really good. One last big one, I guess, would be I mean, the key themes. It's the path towards the Spring Boot native apps with Andy Clement and Sebastian Deleuze. So that one is a bit more experimental and future oriented, but really it's a must watch if you're interested in that space. They really explain like how that support is really being implemented right now, what's our vision for the future. And the progress they made. Even if you watched the last year's talk they made last year, they really show the improvements and the progress they made over the last 12 months. So I really like that one as well. I don't know if you guys wanted to share some of your favorites. I've got some other favorites. Like those are the 4 big ones that I really identified, but I have quite a few that I really liked as well. Are really different, but feel free.
I would just make a connection between, I loved Ben Hale's talk also. Building images is dear to my heart, so I really enjoyed his talk. He's always great to listen to on the topic. And I would say that in conjunction to that, Madhura Bava gave in one of the keynotes an overview that also went into that topic. And I thought her presentation on that was phenomenal as well. So one is kind of like a higher level, and then Ben Hale goes into pretty deep demos. But those two together give a really great information about the topic and its value, building images.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to go ahead and be a little selfish. The Spring Batch 4.3 talk by Mahmood. Several good takeaways from there. One was that we're supporting Java 14 records, so I don't have to do a full bean creation. I can just use a record. Isn't it nice just to say name, address instead of getter, setter? Isn't that kind of cool? Also, Spring Batch is working. It's still marked experimental, but support for GraalVM. So there's a lot of work in our ecosystem on that. So kind of exciting to see that. So
cool. So speaking of records, I don't know if you didn't watch that one, you definitely should. It's really short and sweet. It's No Hate on Java 8 with Angie Jones. This one is really good. I mean, it's not as a person giving talks. I really enjoyed that one because when you're trying to give a talk with a list of features, and especially when it comes to language features, it's really hard to make it dynamic and enjoyable. You can get bored easily, and that one is quite the opposite. It's very dynamic. It shows all the good features of Java between 8 and 15, and she's also really showing like her own insights into the features, when to use them or not. She makes connections with the broader Java ecosystem. So if that one is supported in such and such library. So I think it's really short, but at the same time, it's really complete. And you really like it. It's really easy to do a talk with all the features, but as an entity, you don't really understand when and in which context you can really use them. But in this case, it's really good. She's using test and a real test case application. So it makes it easy, and you it clicks instantly, when to use those. And I really like that one. Definitely one to check out. If one that was more as well, more in-depth, I'd say. But so if you are interested, or if you are deploying reactive applications in production with Reactivity, so basically if you're using Spring Web Flux or Reactivity directly, the how to avoid common mistakes when using Reactivity with Violetta, this one is really deep dive. It's a bit more niche, I'd say, but she's really like explaining properly all the gotchas, and she's giving all the tips about how to do proper diagnostics when you're running into production issues, or when it comes to scalability or debugging protocol, or when you have slow clients or like weirdly behaving HTTP clients. I've seen many questions on the issue trackers and on Stack Overflow in general around this. And I know it's can be a hard space to really grasp. So that one has a lot of knowledge in it. If you're in that space, you should definitely check it out, because there's everything you need to troubleshoot your applications in there. It will save you hours basically if you're in that. So I could go on. I've got other ones, but I don't know. Maybe we want to move on to the next track.
Yes, I'm getting my coworkers out on recess right now. This whole work from home thing. Hey, Wyatt, I need to show my manager to everybody. This is my manager right here. Oh, okay. All right. Have a good recess. Have a good recess. He wants a snacky. Hopefully, we just have some food on the ground that he can pick up. I mean, that's just... He's
a good manager. He wants you to be in the spotlight and just wants to support you from the background.
Exactly. He's like, not me, Dad. Anyway, yes, that was it's great. Let's move on to the next section here. Cora, you are going to be talking about the architecture track. So yeah, what was that all like for you?
Awesome. Okay, so I'm super happy to be talking about this track, and I will say that thank you for inviting me on this panel, because never before have I had to go through like all of the talks in a track in such detail with so much attention, not allowing myself to multitask. And it's amazing how much information and how much learning you can actually accomplish. In thanks to all the people who have contributed and who worked so hard on these talks. Just a note, like, it's always fun listening to these talks, and the main stage is also, people come up with like great demos and great analogies. And there's a couple of talks in the architecture track that had analogies about airplanes. Mark Heckler, in fact, had a demo with like airplane signals for his streaming demo. Rohit Kalakapur was talking about APIs versus event-based architectures, and made a comparison to calculus, with APIs being like the derivative and the events being integrals. And that took me back to my high school math days. And then there was, of course, Oleg Zhirkowski repeatedly during the two of his talks and the main stage talking about ice cream, which always made me hungry. So apparently Java is like strawberry ice cream. So that's always really fun. And I think also, as I was going through these talks, and also again the main stage, what really stood out to me were some repeating themes. So I wanted to go through those themes and kind of mention the talks that tend to fit within those themes. So one of them, of course, one is just general Spring Cloud, as Glenn was talking about earlier, and how there were some great talks in the intro, in the beginner-friendly track about that, but as well, that was true for the architecture track. In particular, Olga, I'm going to mess up her last name, but Macheshek Sharma and Ryan Baxter gave a talk on the power of Spring Cloud. And I think, being the architecture track, they included a little more than maybe just the basic, like how to use it, but they went into configuration. Sorry, I've just been logged out of my Google Drive here. I'm losing my notes. So give me one tiny second to log back in. But Olga and Ryan, yeah, so they went into a little bit more of like how to configure things in particular, rather than just like the basic like Spring Initializer and start it up and it magically works. And in particular, they went into, given that Ribbon is being deprecated, some of the options for switching that out. So that's a great talk, and they did a lot of live coding to check out if you're in that boat. Another theme was functions, and so Oleg, following up on his main stage talk, he gave a great demo on functions, and really, like, to me, what was phenomenal. So I personally haven't done much function coding, and that talk, I would recommend it to anybody who wants to learn about functions. It's just astoundingly simple. And it has all these ramifications for really just allowing developers to be really hyper-focused on the business value that they're adding to their code. It simplifies testing, because then at the end of the day, when you're testing a function, you really can concentrate just on testing the business code that you've included in there. And all of the sort of plumbing around it becomes something that you delegate to Spring. And he has a wonderful demo where he just switches out the Spring Boot starters in the POM file, and suddenly you've got your functions working with Kafka, or working with Rabbit, or working with REST-based. And then he introduces in that talk that they will also integrate with RSocket. And so there's a second talk that Oleg does with Spencer Gibb, who's the lead for Spring Cloud and has been working on the Spring Cloud work relating to RSocket, which is now under the RSocket routing project on GitHub. So they go further into that. They give a deeper overview on RSocket in general and its advantages. And so tying those two things together, Oleg was showing how, again, with just a few more lines of code, but then switching out your Spring Boot starters to work with RSocket, suddenly you've got your functions connecting with RSocket. And then the piece that Spencer Gibb brought into the picture is that when you want to scale, then RSocket is a point-to-point connection between two processes. So when you start to create multiple instances of either process, then you suddenly have to make more connections. So it makes a lot of sense to put a broker in between in the middle of that architecture, so all of your instances have a single point of connection. And that's what that RSocket routing project is. And so Spencer gives a demo on how to use that. So that combination, functions and RSocket, I think is also really cool. Another theme that came up repeatedly as well is APIs. So on one end, we had a demo by Alexei Nesterov and Gareth Clay showing how to use Spring Cloud Gateway specifically on VMware Tanzu application service. So they talked a little bit about the open source Spring Cloud Gateway and the filters that are included in it. So rewriting things in your request, or intercepting the response and doing something. Of course, as we were mentioning earlier with Glenn, you always can add Spring Cloud Security to your gateway, so it can also become a central point to manage security. But then their focus was really on the commercial release of Spring Cloud Gateway for Tanzu application service, and the additional features that brings to the table. So some were, for example, just the ability with a simple CS create service or a couple of clicks on the UI to actually deploy a gateway, so you don't even have to. It is just a Spring Boot app in the end, but to kind of alleviate your teams from having to manage that as one of their source code repositories. And in doing that, there is the way you configure that gateway instance is through some JSON. And so they showed a few examples of different things you can do. You can integrate it with single sign-on. You can accomplish end-to-end TLS, client certification validation, and rate limiting. So rate limiting with the open source gateway requires something like a Redis, for example. The rate limiting with the commercial product doesn't require any extra infrastructure. They've done a little bit of innovation on that side of things. And and also so binding your apps to the gateway, you can do it through JSON, but you can also simply use the CF bind service. If you deploy an application to Tanzu application service, and simply binding that to the gateway will automatically add the route to the gateway. So they've made the gateway really easy to use and a little bit more powerful. Another theme that came up a lot was, as we mentioned with the Spring Cloud data flow, is in general streaming architectures, event-based architectures, and there were several talks that touched on this topic. Mark Heckler gave a phenomenal and fun demo. He also has a great title, Game of Streams, How to Team and Get the Most of Your Messaging Platforms. That's always fun. But he really, again, drove the point home about streaming, focusing on the value, that you can avoid getting too far into the weeds. And he showed a demo where you can, again, switch out Kafka for Rabbit, etc. So achieve a lot of power, scalability, flexibility, very versatile. And he has that fun kind of airplane demo based on his experience as a pilot, as I learned listening to his talk. And another one was, we had someone from Confluent, Victor Gamov. He gave a talk titled The Tales of Event Driven, told by a Spring developer. And again, kind of, he gave a fun analogy of a monolith to microservice architecture being like, you start with a little plant and you end with a jungle. And by the end of it, by the time you've got all your microservices and all this, it becomes this like very, very dark place where it's hard to see through the weeds and all the leaves. And so he said that streaming is an improvement on the traditional microservice pattern. And it's easy. It allows you to decouple systems more so than even microservices. So he spoke about evolving an existing database into event streams with Kafka Connect in particular. But that's also a really great talk to see on the topic. And another couple on the same sort of event streaming was a use case by Penske. Penske, in partnership with VMware, so someone from Krishna Gogineni from VMware and Shruti Modi from the Penske team got together and gave this talk, and they basically laid out the Penske architecture for their connected fleet with real-time data. And their architecture used, again, Tanzu application service. They used Kafka. They had Gemfire for in-memory caching. They used Postgres for their geospatial and geolocation features. They used Greenplum for large volumes, Greenplum being a massively parallel processing database. They had it running on Amazon Web Services. They had Tanzu Observability. And all of this they accomplished using Spring Boot, Spring Cloud. And they really highlighted that automation was key to their success. Am I good on time? Can I keep going?
Yeah, you have like 2 more minutes or so. Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Then we had a talk by Rohit Kalapure and Madhav Saf on the question of, okay, now API-based architectures and event-based architectures, which one do you choose, when, how? So they talked about both and how generally you should be combining both and figuring out when to use each, and they propose a maturity model for each of those. So that was also interesting. And I'll skip ahead. I mean, other themes I guess, security. Matt Rabel gave a great talk on security, testing, steel toe updates. And then there was another one I wanted to mention. Oh, data management is another big theme. And Tala Wolfulu gave a good talk on introducing Sega patterns and microservices. And she talked about a lot of the background that you need to understand that topic, and eventual consistency and the effect going from ACID to maybe something that's more just ACD, and how you compensate for that loss of that letter I, which stands for the isolation of your transactions. So if you're dealing with that problem of data management, which is still one of the biggest challenges of microservices, and that's a good talk to go to for some of that foundational information for that problem.
That's great.
More,
okay. I want to jump in real quick.
And I think the best thing is, people can just go to the track and they can check it all out, because your enthusiasm for it is palpable, and just means that the content committee did a great job putting together some really great talks. And several people have mentioned the main stage talks so far, and we will definitely talk about those after we kind of hear about all the tracks. So, excuse me, I pushed the wrong button there. So yes, let's move on to Tiffany, who's going to be talking to us about the cloud native track. So Tiffany, I'm going to go talk to my manager while you talk about cloud native.
I'm actually going to make one quick comment regarding Cora's architecture section. So I also wanted to put my thumbs up for Mark's talk, because it was really cool, like seeing some of the other, just like talk about some of the common like messaging platforms, but then later going into the code and like things to do with diving into that specifically for Spring Cloud Stream. And I wanted to mention that at noon Pacific today, he will be on this same channel doing a Tanzu TV code session. So if you just go to tanzu.tv. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my actual section. So if you're kind of wondering, okay, what is this whole cloud native platforms, since it dives away, for some of the talks at least, from the general Spring theme. So basically a lot of it is focused on things that are related, like Kubernetes or Cloud Foundry or several of the different like Tanzu services out there. So and then there's also just general things. So like Brian, one of the talks I really liked was by Brian Lyles. He had a talk that was called Kubernetes, YAML, and Science. So this one might be especially like interesting to people who aren't a fan of presentation slides, since there literally are none. The entire thing for almost an hour basically is just pure demo. So basically he started off with like a small like little YAML example, and then as he went through, he was building new functionality onto it, talking about things such as some of the templating tools, such as like there's like YTT, he mentioned kept. He actually showed one of his tools that he had been creating as well, more on the like web browser type of things. I found out that VS Code apparently is kind of actually a web browser, so that was entirely new to me. And that's one that I'll definitely be looking at again, because there's just so much information there. Another one, so I'm kind of leaning, first I'll talk about a few of them on day one. So that was on day one. Another one that I really liked was handling your secrets in your I can't talk today, I'm tired. In your cloud native architecture by Jonathan Regier. So basically like the main topic was like, how do you have secure, robust, and automated application credential storage and distribution? And then he went into, okay, so how do we achieve this? What are the different roles we have, whether we're as developers or other types of things, to get to that point? And kind of talking about how like your secrets backend, how that can coexist with Tanzu application service, and just kind of diving into the different things and showing different goals and how to achieve those. I have one more that I want to mention that is for day one, but I'm going to mention it later so that Cora can join in, because it's actually a talk that she was on. So I'll go back to that afterwards. So on day two, at least I'm pretty sure this was day two, this one was a little bit different than some of the other ones, where it's like, here is this deep dive thing into a specific like service or technical thing. Basically, it was, she called it Permission to Fail, and it was by Don Parzik. And so basically, I feel like this is a topic that isn't covered enough. Basically, it was about how it is okay to fail, that it is fine to fail, and that is the main goal really is like, if you make mistakes, you need to learn from those mistakes. You need to embrace a growth mindset. Take some time out to actually like play around, and that culture matters. And basically that experimentation leads to new knowledge. So like, it's not just about, did I get this right every single time? It's about, what did you end up coming out with it in the end? What did you learn? Did you get better at something? Do you understand something more now because of the mistakes or lack thereof, either way, of what you have done? So it's not exactly a highlight. It's just because I was part of it, so it feels weird to not mention it. But I did a talk that was called Make Your Kubernetes Clusters Production Ready. So basically it was high-speed version of trying to go through using VMware's Tanzu Mission Control, or TMC, Tanzu Observability by Wavefront, the open source Octant, Harbor, and Valero to make your clusters production ready. So like Tanzu Mission Control, basically it's used as a centralized place to manage different Kubernetes clusters. So you could bring in something for on-prem. You could have stuff with vSphere. You could have something that is using Tanzu Kubernetes grid, so that would run on AWS, or you could pull in one of your existing clusters. You probably can tell from Tanzu Observability that is basically things like being able to look into metrics and graphs and just kind of observability. Octa is like this dashboard where you can see all the different things that are running in your cluster. And you can see it's pretty much real time, where it does the effective thing of like if you do a watch. So you can see what is coming up and what's not working and dig through it that way. Harbor is it's a container registry. And then there's Valero, which handles things like backing up your cluster. So if you accidentally delete something, or if you need to migrate your cluster, or something's just wrong there, you can use Valero to go back to a previous version, whether it's one that you saved specifically, or if it's just if you set up automated backups. And I did a longer version of that instead. So like basically my talk was only 30 minutes ish. So the longer, I did like an hour and a half version of actually like going through all of these things, which is on tanzu.tv under Tanzu Tuesdays. Another talk that was really good, so if we can think about how there was like the beginner track for Spring, this kind of is like a beginner track or a beginner talk before you deal with Kubernetes. So it's called You Want to Kubernetes, You Must Know Containers by Angel Rivera. So I thought it was especially good because a lot of the talks were diving into very detailed or more intermediate or advanced things. So just like the reminder that there are still people that are attending these conferences, or just in general, that are very new to these things, even though, yes, for some people you've been dealing with it for years and years, but there's still people learning every single day. So basically what was gone into was just general containers, understanding Docker containers, because if you don't understand that, it's kind of hard to jump directly into doing Kubernetes. So making sure that you are effective with that and knowing that well, so that you can be more effective and do a better job with whatever you're trying to do with Kubernetes. So this is where I'm going to go back into Cora's talk. So it was called Weaving Through the Mesh, Making Sense of Istio and Overlapping.
It was your favorite talk, right, Tiffany?
Huh?
It was your
my
favorite talk, right?
It was really good. I liked it a lot. But yeah, it was with Cora and Maria Gabriela Brody. And basically, like, it was nice. I hadn't seen some of the talks really in general talking about service mesh as much, or Istio. So it was especially nice kind of seeing that here. And it was a longer talk, which meant that they were actually able to like dive into things like distributed systems. What are some of the challenges and things that you can do with them? Distributed meshes, and then different types of solutions that you could go into. And I'm gonna let Cora talk a tiny bit more about her talk, since she's gonna do a better job than me.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. Yeah, so we basically talked about, we started really focusing on Istio, but then we realized we should maybe more broadly be talking about service meshes. But we basically, it was fun because we took these applications that were kind of old. There was an application that, so Ryan Baxter had built an application, I think 2 years ago, to demo Spring Cloud Gateway. And then there's an application that Spencer Gibb uses to demo RSocket. So that he, was at least probably not edited also for, maybe he edited it more recently since RSocket routing broker has changed a bit. But basically, we took their heritage legacy-ish apps and we replatformed them, first of all, to Kubernetes. And then we took the gateway one and we replatformed that to use Istio. And really through that exercise, we learned a lot about what does it mean to developers to try to adopt these technologies? Is it worth it? What are the trade-offs? And so that really anchored our talk. So we went through an overview of the different architectures. So an API gateway-based architecture that you could achieve with just for your Spring Cloud components. Then what it would look like if you used service mesh and you could offload some of those responsibilities to kind of like the plumbing of the platform. And then the RSocket model, which is fundamentally a little bit different with point-to-point connections. And really what we found is that, if the Istio stuff, while it's very powerful, there's definitely a trade-off in terms of upskilling developers and also sort of like who ends up owning certain responsibilities. Spring Cloud allows you to retain ownership of that stuff more within the development team, and it's all within your Java skill set. And that's actually very meaningful. And I think, so our conclusion was that unless there's really a business driver that can motivate and justify you moving to something, refactoring to something like Istio, that, maybe stick to your current Spring Cloud stuff, because it's really easy to replatform. I mean, RSocket has different advantages in terms of like cost savings and things like that. So that's a little bit of a different use case. And also, I think that in the future, you'll start to see, and this we validated with folks like the Tanzu Service Mesh product manager, and also Chris Sterling, who leads the product manager for the Spring Cloud Gateway for Tanzu Application Service. That I think the tendency is going to be that you're going to have these service mesh products, and then there'll be layers built on top of it that will make it easier for developers to use. So maybe imagine a world where you're still working with your Spring Cloud Gateway, and then Spring Cloud Gateway in the back will translate its stuff, will integrate with a mesh, right? And so it'll do its own translation to the way the mesh works, so that you don't have to burden developers with that direct plumbing interaction, so to speak. So there's a business driver, definitely, like mesh is great. Otherwise, Spring Cloud is awesome.
Yeah, that was way better than I could have done. Yeah, I was noticing that because it seemed like more of the focus previously was, at least in the like abstract / title, was on Istio, and then when actually watching it, it was kind of more generalized or a little bit more broad.
Right. Yeah, we also got we also started with our starry eyes on the buzzword, and then we realized, oh, there's trade-offs.
I mean, the title does sound kind of like Spider-Man-ish. Okay, let's sub edit titles. Mine is just exactly what it is and nothing fun. Yeah, so like kind of going further, so like mine mentioned tons of observability, but this was all just like briefly going to things and just like observability in general. There was also a talk called Observability, Distributed Tracing in Open Source, The Missing Primer. See, everyone has better titles than me, which was by Daniel Kahn. And basically it was kind of like going through what some of the general things you care about with metrics, like how to collect some data, going to a bunch of details about different things with tracing, how to do your collection with things such as like Jaeger or Zipkin. And then like in my talk, actually, it covered a little bit with Zipkin, but yeah, basically going into some of those other different things, commercial, and just kind of comparing some of them and what you actually, some things that you may care about, looking at errors. And then went afterward into general like open source stuff with open telemetry and kind of just like digging into that. And then that's where it like started diving into like actual code and going through some of the things there. Does anyone want to chime in for this section?
Actually, we're on time, so
cool.
You did a great job. Yeah,
I blabbed for long enough.
Woohoo! And a shout out to Cora for being able to talk about her own presentation, which is, it's always nice to have the person in the room, all right? So cool. Just a reminder, if you have any questions or anything that you want to comment or something to share, please go to the Q&A. You're welcome to make that comment there. A reminder that all of these presentations are on the SpringOne.io, and you can go back and check out these tracks. If you're taking notes, you can go back and check out all these great titles, or titles that are exactly what they are, but have great content. Right, Tiffany? We'll go workshopping title class with you one time or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. All right, so let's move on to our next panelist, Mr. Cote, who's ready and waiting. He's in the ominous black room. So how are you, sir? Good morning. Good afternoon for you.
That's right. Yeah, I am in this room. It's true. Well, so I along with a couple of other people, helped put together the Agile leadership track. And, over the years, what I like to do with this track a lot is I think I'm the one person amongst all of us who doesn't actually ever use a command prompt for anything other than uninstalling my VPN when I need to get it to work. But what I like to do in this track is kind of collect together case studies and a lot of what I think about is meatware, right? Like if you got your software and your hardware, you got all this meatware stuff if you want to improve the way that you do software. And there's some that slip in that are a little softer and hardware-y, but whatever. But a lot of them are basically stories of improvement and transformation, if you will. And I especially like to make sure we focus on, I've never come up with a great phrase that doesn't sound judgmental-ish for it, but just normal organizations, the ones that don't have the advantage of just being able to heat themselves up by burning piles of money every quarter to achieve growth and more. They have to sort of just run the way that they're doing things and improve. So that said, I want to give you a couple of ones that I liked in particular, and then kind of go into a little bit of detail, unless anyone else wants to chime in about one that I think is especially handy. But first, I just want to second Tiffany's thing that that service mesh talk that Cora was involved in. That was great. It was good. I find service mesh stuff, especially the way it's talked about, even the word, it's basically like a very confusing bucket of eels writhing around. I can't make head or nor tail and figure out what's going on there. But if you go through that talk, you'll see sort of here's the problems being solved. And I'm going to grossly simplify it. It's basically if you can put a little listener between one connection coming in and a connection going out, you can do a lot of things, which I think is wonderful, right? And you wrap the policy around it. But having that simplicity of what it is, it erases a lot of the meandering around you're going to do trying to figure out what's going on there. And then old people like me who know what SOA stands for and know what orbs are, we're just all right, got it. I know what that is, except it's much better. So anyhow, to give you a quick overview of some of the talks, some that I think you should check out. There's one called How Not to Develop a Modern Product Management Product at Speed, sort of practice. And this is from Jana Werner at Tesco Bank. And it's very impressive, as someone mentioned, that a lot of people could make interesting talks in 25 minutes and then minus the 3 minutes where they're just kind of introducing themselves and asking for Q&A. It's very compressed talk. But it's great because as we mentioned on the main stage, there were a couple of people who mentioned that because of all the COVID pandemic stuff, their organizations were suddenly forced to improve, despite the idea that they felt like they couldn't improve for years. And this is some lessons learned from doing that at Tesco Bank, where they really forced themselves to go through transforming how they're doing things in Agile and improving and changing around the technology stack they use, the way they plan for things when they're deploying multiple times a week. And it's really encouraging to see her kind of go over, here's the lessons we learned, and how we're going to kind of keep doing that as things go forward. And I always advise people kind of start small and grow up from there, which is great. I mean, she had a great phrase that, like, you seem like a lunatic until things work. And so it's good when you're one of these change agents to kind of understand that, like, what you're saying when you're talking about we should deploy software multiple times a day, or we should do all this new things. Everyone probably thinks you're crazy based on what they're currently doing. So you should sort of kind of learn how to not sound so crazy. And, I started watching that Ratchet show. You definitely don't want someone to think you're crazy. That's not a good scene to be involved in. Now, there's another talk that I especially liked called Transforming Air France KLM's Payment Application to Cloud Native in 6 Weeks. Some of these titles more or less are the talk themselves, that they're so detailed. But what I like about this one is I fly on KLM, right? And I've observed, I moved to Amsterdam about 1.5 years ago, and I've observed their mobile app and their customer experience improving and changing very rapidly. So it's fun to kind of get a look underneath the hood. I don't know what you have on a plane, an engine, a fuselage. I'm not an engineer, but to kind of see how things are operating there. And I think in particular, one of the lessons learned from there is to pick an application that you want to do in a new, more agile, product-centric way, use a new technology with it first, that a very small one that you kind of make compromises on, as far as, like, you don't change everything overnight, but you do show improvement. And it's really nice if it's kind of a difficult application, because then, as they say, they were working on the payment processing application, which was, as you can imagine, incredibly important for a business that makes money. You got to process payments. And so, it was quite old and a little creaky. And their point was that if we can improve this, we can improve all sorts of things, right? Like, we've proven that doing things in this new fashion, that doing things better is possible. So finally, as my small, another small recommendation, there's a panel that I hosted, and I think bar none, it was the best talk of all of SpringOne, because it involved so many people, and it was on a great topic. Maybe the deconfusing the bucket of eels was better. I'm gonna have to go rewatch that one, and I'll get back to you on that. But I think, joking aside, what I wanted to do with this panel is, when it comes to talking about how you change behaviors and the way you operate to be better at software and more agile, I found that people don't really talk about what managers need to do. There's this notion of, like, servant leadership. And so I wanted to start off a conversation with several managers, kind of in my jokey style, which was sort of like, it sounds like if you're going to be a servant leader, it's going to be really hard to justify 120% payout on your annual bonus. You just kind of made yourself into a servant. And so, like, how do you as a manager, like, one, start to think about yourself and kind of, like, making sure you're managing your own career, but more importantly, or not more importantly, but also, like, what does that mean if you're managing managers, right? Like, what, as you go kind of up the stack in a large organization, it can't all just be individual contributors and people like that. Eventually you've got, like, if you're managing 500 applications, you've probably got, I don't know, 20, 30 more managers up and down the chain. And how do you manage them, and what do you do? And so it was interesting to hear from the three people on that, how that worked. So then finally, I won't go too much in detail of this, but I think this is one of the ones that is definitely worth looking into. There's a talk from TD Ameritrade, which is hard to say fast 3 times, but it's called, now don't fall asleep when I tell you the title. It's called Measuring ROI and Driving Adoption of TAS in an Enterprise. Now, I like this one because it talks about why you should buy our product, which I'm always into. But really, the other reason that it's good is, if you've ever tried to convince your organization to not even just spend money on improving the way that you do things, on tools or organization or staffing, but actually maintain that effort over, 3, 6, 12, 24 months, you have to come up with reports and ways of measuring if it's been successful or not, or return on investment, or ROI. And when you work at a software vendor, you get involved in this a lot because you're asking people to buy your stuff, and they need to make an ROI case. So I've seen a lot of these, but it's interesting to see TD Ameritrade walk through how they started with establishing the principles of what their investment was going to be and how they wanted to pay off. And then there's two cool tricks that they went over that was really good, which was one, they decided they would have one metric that they were going to track for ROI and kind of report up. And that metric was basically how many applications they had deployed on their new platform on the Tanzu application server or Pivotal Cloud Foundry, whatever you want to call it. And their idea was that if the more apps we're deploying on there, the more value we will instantly have. We'll get the benefits of doing that. So the faster we are to paying off the investment in it. And then I think the second cool trick that they realized was that you can change that metric, right? So as they started deploying more and more on there, they realized that how they would represent the value, how they would show metrics up through the organization is it was something different. And now they changed it to basically being what they called cycle time, not to get us in a whole like lean sort of definitional debate, but basically how long it would take for developers to write their code and deploy it into production, and finding all the bottlenecks, the things that slowed them down there. And again, I like this one because essentially their premise, right? And this is what's nice about this talk is they walk through the reasoning of why they had these metrics and why it maps directly to use another phrase I'm sure everyone likes, to their business value. What's valuable for their business, and why everyone gets paid every day and they come in and they get to do fun stuff. Is they figured that like anything that's holding us back from actually getting more features into production to be more competitive and innovative is bad. So we should continually track what those things are. And the more that we can reduce that, that's the return on investment that we get, is that we have a more lively rather than a stagnant business going on there. So that's my quick overview of those talks there. I don't think I left very much breathing room for anyone to interject if they liked any of them. So I apologize for that.
Well, you made Glenn fall asleep with that title as promised. There he goes, back into his waters. It looks like you're floating on the water behind you, by the way. That's really well done, which my daughter just learned how to do, and she's very excited about it. Look at me, Daddy. Anyway.
I hope that now if we were to look at your shirt, is it Bart saying "What me ROI" or something?
No. It's the moon crying, saying I'm sure
I thought that was
just a phase.
I thought for sure that was Bart. That goes to show you.
It does. We were folks. You don't understand. Right before we got started, we started going through all the '80s references possible. So I could see this looks. If I hold it like this, it looks like Bart Simpson's hair right there. So. And
I realized, just for Bob's sanity, I made an Alfred E. Newman reference there, not a Bart Simpson reference. So I'm sorry.
What me worry? Well, thank you very much for all of your references. Yes, I feel like if everybody can get their private cloud native buzzword bingo, and then you go and watch all your different tracks, you can play buzzword bingo and see all the different buzzwords that pop up. Because that's what's so great about the 5 tracks is they had a bit of everything that you could possibly want. And you could kind of go down different rabbit holes. And it was all set up by the main stage, right? The main stage, we had the keynote in the morning on the first day, and then there was an evening keynote, which I never understand the evening keynote, but that's okay. It's the second note. And then, of course, the keynote for the second day. And so, we had a lot of customers talking about kind of how they're actually implementing Spring and Kubernetes and different products into their portfolios to do better business. And so those are the best, because you actually get to hear how people are changing and transforming their businesses. So were there any particular client conversations that jumped out to anybody?
I liked, I don't know if more than one, but I certainly remember that Fiserv particularly. Well, yeah, there was another one. There was a Carina and Fiserv, but a couple of them were talking about work that they had to do because of COVID, sort of like really react quickly because of COVID. So Fiserv had to help with the approval of loan applications under the CARES Act. And so they essentially said that they had starting, I think, mid-March, they had 15 developers that produced over 100,000 lines of code. They made 436 prod releases in 28 days. but they ended up being really instrumental in enabling small banks, community banks, and helping small businesses get loans. And the other one was, I forget the name of the speaker, but the organization was, I think, Karina or something, where they were helping with like childcare, given the changes in responsibilities due to COVID, and that they decided to work with labs. Like I said, does that make sense in terms of timing? Yeah, with a labs group, right? And so they also very quickly, within 2 to 4 weeks, had an application out that helped people find childcare. So that was interesting. Just that, it's so necessary in a time of crisis where your priorities change and you realize you have to adapt to business. Even AJ had said that initially in the main stage, where he said they surveyed organizations and saw how COVID impacted what they said were their priorities, and adapting their business models or suddenly rose up to like the main priority or the second priority. And so I think these were 2 great examples.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was going to mention that too, as I mentioned in my talking earlier. I think that was a great example of, like, I don't know, turning a big frown upside down, in the sense of, like, because we have this crisis of opportunity, we actually like did something kind of amazing. And I think that kind of has popped up in several of the talks. And as another mainstay thing, I think the talk from BT, it's always interesting to see what they have to talk about. They've done a lot of interviews and talks, and there's actually, as a reference outside of this, there's a great interview with Rajesh there in InfoWorld that was published. And if you read through this interview, in similar to the talk that he gives and the talks that he gives, I think what stands out a lot is just like the mindset change that people go through, of just like, we believe that if we actually do more of a product-oriented way of doing software, it'll meet the corporate goals that we have. And I think it's great to have someone like BT and other people like Northern Trust and the other customers kind of walking through that, because, what I encounter a lot, and what a lot of keynote talks are great for, is, they're usually from higher level people at organizations who are basically saying, like, we believe that we can do software better, and we're willing to like go through the changes to do it, rather than just like, I don't know, those crazy IT people. They keep telling me we need to do things differently, and it sounds all weird. So it's encouraging to see talks from people like that.
Yeah, and one of the things that was also different about this, besides being virtual, is that normally when we're all together and in person, we can, gather and we're talking, we're enjoying each other, and then there's always that area where we can go kind of just relax, grab some food, and usually there's games or ping pong or whatever. And that's not you can't have that virtually, right? Like you can pre-record stuff, you can have some talking head stuff, you can have some Q&As through Slack, which was really great that we were able to kind of incorporate some questions and answers afterwards. But and actually sorry, I had a brain tangent that doesn't need to be answered by you people. Anyway. And so,
no, but can I add to that, Bob?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I do think, I think like what you're saying is really interesting, because there are a lot of advantages to being in person. But I was so relieved this year with SpringOne, where like I had this single screen that told me everything that was going on, with this really clear indicator of what's happening right now. And if I wanted to switch from one talk to another, I just clicked a button. And I think, because normally I'm not very good with I'm not a planner. So like I usually end up deciding what talk I'm going to go to like in the break between talks, which means that I have to figure out the map, and I'm late to any talk that I want to go to. And then if I want to switch, it's like, do it again. I get, I miss everything because I'm just running around like an idiot. So this was amazing. Like that was an amazing aspect of like not being there in person. And I think we did a great job of providing, like you say, Slack and the Q&A and the social track and trying to compensate. But anyway, I appreciated that.
Yeah, there was a lot of attention to detail, which is great. And clearly nothing was perfect because this is the first time I figured it out. But I feel like the team and kudos, hats off to all with Jamie and Tasha specifically on our call listening. So I can shout out their names. But yeah, that whole team just coming up with how do we complete this conference feel as best as we can while we're doing it virtually. And so yes, we had the main stage and we had the tracks, and then like as I was getting to a little bit, which was what do we do to relax? What do we do to kind of like just unplug? We're still in the space. We still want to be around the environment of this conference. And so there was a social track. There was a 6th track, and it was a space that you could say, you know what, I'm at work. My job today is to be at this event, but maybe at this particular time there's nothing I want to watch, or I just need to like shut my brain off for a few seconds and go over to a social track. And so I didn't know if any of you all did that yourselves, or if you even saw some social tracks over there that kind of caught your eye, or people were definitely buzzing about. I mean, on some of the Slack channels I saw, I think there was a guy who was like teaching TikTok dances. Anyway, so I don't know if I'm opening it up to anybody else.
I
have
was
a personal
emceeing
favorite,
or asleep Pacific time, so I didn't get to see any of them.
I mean, yeah.
I did the yoga.
Oh, you did the yoga. See, that's perfect.
I did.
Normally there's
yeah,
a 5K run, and there was no,
Hey.
so the yoga was kind of a way for people to all do an exercise in the early morning and stuff like that. So
Plus it was
I
at
could
8 a.m.
say-
It was the only one that didn't conflict in time. Sorry, Glenn.
oh,
No,
right, sure, right, that makes sense.
No, I was going to say, I can honestly say I was a part of the social track. There was an Ask Me Anything session. I was a part of a panel on the social track. So I did teach
cool.
dancing or yoga, but we answered questions. So that was also a great part of the social track too. So kind of allowing folks to come in and just say, ask questions. And
What
there
kind
was
of questions did you get?
well, for me, it was for anything from data flow, but they also had one for, I think, boot. And so what we said is open it up to whatever questions, beginning to advanced. And so we offered just an opportunity for people just to chime in a live session. And it was interesting in that we had the whole team there. And if you looked at the Spring Boot one, they had the whole team there just fielding questions. And sometimes, like, I actually went into the Spring Boot, I wish we could have kept those recordings, but it was just a great way to hear what people were asking. And so I like that open session feel too. Again, part of, we can't be together physically, but we could certainly be together electronically, which was great.
Well, and the other great thing about these events, because I'm as an event person, as somebody who goes to events around the world, a lot of times I get asked questions, and it's harder because I might know a little bit of the answer or none of the answer, and it's like, well, let me get your information and try and send you to the right person and kind of pass that channel around. And so, these big events in particular, everybody's there, but it doesn't mean they're all in the same room. So again, having kind of the ability to be on Zoom and for us all to say, all right, well, it doesn't matter if I'm in the Netherlands or I'm in France or I'm in Georgia or wherever, we're all in the same room right now. And so we can ask and answer these questions and have these conversations. And so that's another kind of great thing about, that Ask Me Anything or the kind of after panel questions, because not only, I think last year we had 4,000 people in person, and this one we had 41,000 people in person. So we're able to expand our audience and have more people listening to different tracks that normally could fit into a room, and also have these conversations. So
I think another thing that I noticed, because when I was giving my talk, obviously when you're giving a talk, you can't monitor the Slack channel on your talk at the same time, right? It's something you kind of get to afterwards. So when I went to the Slack channel, I realized that Spencer and Spencer Gibbon and Ramiro Salas had been actively answering a lot of the questions on my Slack channel, which, for me was a huge help. But also it means that everybody who's attending and who's participating in the Slack channels has access to so many more experts than just the speakers to get answers to their questions. So I thought that was also pretty amazing.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but that is a good point that they're I think with the low to no barriers of entry of both like cost and travel, right? Like you didn't have to travel for it. So you get a lot more people, and then also, there's like a ton more questions in real time, which is interesting and nice. I always like to tell people, you can ask questions after I leave. So it's nice to have them like queued up in a window instead of in person there. But that was great to have those questions. And you know, what I really appreciated is you know, you can have people from all over the world if they don't mind being awake at weird hours. But normally it's really hard to get people from especially from Europe and, well, not especially, but from Europe and Asia and other places to come over to the US to present. But I think we were able to fill out a lot more people from abroad.
I think what was also really cool about it is that some folks are kind of timid to come up and talk to the speaker, right? And so this lowered that barrier quite a bit because the questions I got were really varied, which is awesome. So I think, again, this is like one of those opportunities that somebody can say, you know, that speaker's busy. I don't, and when first off, as speakers, we want you to come talk to us afterwards. We really want you to come and ask us questions because that drives us to know more about what you're doing and who you are and how we can help. But conversely, this time it was like, you know, when I came off the chat, you know, off the talk, I went in and there was just this, like y'all said, all these questions. So I was just sitting there answering questions for a long time. And I think it's awesome for us to have a chance to be able to, you know, again, if you ever meet us at conference, feel free to come talk to us. But I think this was great for us to be able to have a greater reach out and be able to talk to folks.
I can't believe no one mentioned the Slack channel during the social track, especially during the pet show segment. The Slack channel was pure gold. Like you missed the best pictures, including one of my cat, and you missed it. Aww. Sorry. Yeah, no, that was really funny. That's definitely something that would be probably a bit strange to do that live, like showing you going around in the main at the main event showing pictures of your cat, but maybe one day. I don't know.
I definitely on Twitter posted my dog sleeping during like and stuff. So I know there was like a little, you know, there was all the social, there was a Slack as well as like Twitter and everything, like, you know, to try and stay involved. So sorry, Tiffany, what were you?
Jerk. I need dog pictures after this. You have to make up for it. I wanted to quickly jump back over to main stage and like we talked about like clients and stuff. Like one of the things that I thought was pretty cool was so Julia Lewson from Microsoft was talking about like the partnership with VMware and and how like their Azure Spring Cloud went GA. So I thought it was pretty cool to see that. And since I didn't actually know that there were managed versions of Spring Cloud, so that was cool. And then I really liked the talk that Dr. Annika Simmons did. So basically, it was about like the human aspects of getting software to production. Basically, she brought up Maslow's hierarchy of needs and where software engineers can end up falling in the different levels. And she suggested that to climb the top, basically you have to be intentional at like designing a system of support at every level, and went into like how to go and do this. And I believe this was, I think it was the mornings, it was the morning afternoon section on the first day, but just kind of saying that you need to make sure that whether it's for yourself or for the people that are reporting to you, that you are caring about not just what are they getting done at work, but also the different, like how to help them with some of the other things so that everyone can try being at the very top of the chart. So, yeah.
Well, here you go, I thought Tiffany, one interesting, like just to add to what Tiffany said about that talk, I agree that was a really great talk and something I think unusual to find maybe at a technical conference. But I thought like her at the very, very end, she said that not only like do you want to obviously help all of your employees go up the Maslow scale, but also that like things can change over time. So again, when you hit maybe like a crisis like COVID or something, like it's not a static thing, right? Just because you've gotten somebody up to like level 4, level 3 or 4, it doesn't mean that can vary. So you kind of constantly have to be adapting in that sense as well.
I'm getting trying to find a couple questions since we do have a nice little brain trust in here. A great question is there a roadmap, like a visual roadmap for Spring on how one can navigate Spring in order to become a confident Spring developer?
I will say this, there's a couple of ways. One, if you're interested, we did have What is Spring talk I'm not trying to tout myself, but catch that it gives you an overview of the Spring technologies that are out there. But then what I would do is go to the Spring IO website, and let me give you that link. I was going to go to spring.io, then select Learn. And then you'll see there's a quick start. So if you're brand new to Spring Boot and you want to know how to build one up, that is a great place to get started. Then from that, you can go to guides, and then the guides go in and they have getting started guides for various technologies, 15 to 30 minutes. Then they have the topical guides goes into deeper dives into various technologies. And then we have some tutorials that allow you to go for 2 to 3 hours. Now, not to say that that's all there is, but we also have some training available. So you can also click on the training to take a click on that. Also, if you look up Josh Long on YouTube, he'll grab a specific technical or like a Spring project, and he'll just do a deep dive into those for like an hour. So if you're thinking visually, like more like a video, he does a great job on those.
Perfect. Great answer. Thank you, everyone. And then how can one make releasing apps features faster with Spring? How can one make releasing apps features faster?
Well, I'm going to say that depends.
Always.
Always. I think we want to clarify, are you talking about CI/CD, meaning be able to write those features, code it, go through the build process, testing process, and to the end? And with that being said, are we talking about that? Are we talking about actually writing code? Are we talking about, reusing code like Cora brought in, really talking about OLEX, talking about functions and writing functions and being able to have those functions to be, I update a function, which in turn will affect multiple projects that are taking advantage of that function. Then a CI/CD, make sure they get cascaded properly. Again, it depends, right? Unless somebody wants to please fill me in,
I would maybe add to that, Glenn, to what Glenn is saying, that Spring, and especially with Spring Boot. So if you think about sort of, releasing the features faster is part of the whole motivation for microservices in the first place. Taking advantage of like horizontal scaling, cloud infrastructure, but also as monoliths get bigger, the way that you can start to release individual features faster is to break your monolith into little pieces. And really Spring, especially with Spring Boot, is a framework designed to help you with that. If you think about even like, Spring Boot is a process that embeds the app server inside of the process, right? Which is a flip on the older model where you had a jar file and you deployed it onto an existing server farm. And that model is kind of, it's part of the fundamental basics of containerization. And so it's really putting you in a very good position to start building out a microservice architecture. So that's one thing, right? It enables you to start writing applications that encapsulate smaller amounts of code. So it's easier to iterate on those individual applications and to achieve independent release cycles for each Spring Boot application, for each microservice. And then beyond that, Spring just makes all of your coding simpler because it delegates a lot of that sort of boilerplate code to these libraries that you just add to your POM file or your Gradle build file. So you have less coding to do. And all of that sort of blueprint code that you're offloading, you're really just entrusting. Actually, Josh Long had this great quote that I saw once that said, using Spring Boot is like pair programming with the Spring team. So you're really relying on integrations that are provided you by the Spring team and configuration, sort of sensible defaults for configuration that are introduced through the auto configuration features of Spring Boot. So there's just a lot less coding you have to do. And the things that you're not doing you're suddenly able to adopt these best practices of how to do things, right? If you want to do batch processing, and if you use Spring Batch, then suddenly you are doing your batch processing by employing codified best practices as codified by the Spring team. So I think all of those things together really enable you to speed up your feature releases. On the development side, as Glenn says, right? Then you have to automate your CI/CD tool chain as well.
Cora knocked it out of the park, man. I can't see. Just have her answer all my questions. This is awesome.
That's why we have her. It's why
I
we have
know.
her.
It's great.
It's not an accident. All right. Well, I want to thank the panel. I don't want to say we just brushed the surface, but we definitely gave a good roadway for anybody who wanted to kind of go back and watch some more or kind of dive deeper into some different conversations. Again, SpringOne.io has all of the tracks to include the main stage talks as well as individual tracks that you can go back and check out. Something worth mentioning, if you go to tanzu.vmware.com/developer, within the next few weeks, we're actually going to be starting to put some self-paced labs into that area, so that can help with your Spring learnings, as well as just keeping up to date on the different kind of developer side of things with Tanzu and VMware, letting you know that we are there in that top part of the stack, helping everyone try and make their enterprise software better. Tomorrow, as Tiffany mentioned, we've got Mark Heckler on our code. That's what I was trying to say. Code, not Cote. Our code talk. It's at 12 p.m. Pacific. And that's if you go to tanzu.tv, you can check that out. And it's also on our Twitch channel if you go to twitch.com or twitch.tv/Tanzu VMware. We have a lot of great. That's today. Wait, it is today. Today's Wednesday. Oh my goodness. It's still March 137th for me, so I have no idea what day of the week it is. But yes, so that's today at 12. And every Wednesday, we have other Spring core developers. I think Jakob Pillaman will be on next week as well. And we have lots of great content. Tanzu Tuesdays is on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. Cote, when are your shows?
Well, I'm going to try to do them on, what are the days? I think the 2T days. Tuesdays and
Thursdays. All right,
like
cool.
at 11. I think it's Central European time, whatever time that is in Amsterdam and Paris and all the other places.
Wonderful.
That would be an hour earlier in the UK.
Got it, for all of our UK viewerships. So yes, lots of great content happening on tanzu.tv. And I can't thank this panel enough. I can't thank the staff enough. The SpringOne tour. We have another one next month with Mark Heckler, who's going to do a deep dive. Hold on, let me read the description here. A Spring Boot Omakase talk. And so he's definitely he's been mentioned 4 or 5 times during the show alone. He's not even on the show. So make sure you sign up, go to springonetour.io and keep updated to register for that which will be next month, excuse me. And again, I have no idea what day or time it is. And I want to thank Tosh Eisenberg, Jamie DiMartini, Yvonne. Thank you so much for doing the Q&A. And thank you for being on my Slack Q&A during the beginner talk. He was another one of those people, just like Spencer Gibb, another one of those great people to be able to answer questions live during the actual presentations, giving that technical support, which is just so helpful and so wonderful. We can't thank you enough for joining us. And if you were with us for the original SpringOne, I hope you had a great time. I hope you keep learning and going back and checking out different conversations. Is there anything else I missed?
Yeah, thanks, Bob, for being our MC.
Well, you're welcome. My pleasure. It's what I do. And thank you, Wyatt, for being as quiet as you could. Thank you. I appreciate that, manager. And anyway, I think that's it for all of us here. We really appreciate you. Stay safe, and we'll hopefully see